gender. Can you talk a little bit about essentially how these processes work for not only kids but also adults in the context of sports and youth sports in particular?
Well, what got me really interested, I mean, that Barbie Girls and Sea Monsters piece which started out really as just kind of a chance observation, came at a time when my kids were very young and just getting into youth sports, and I was also becoming a department chair and thinking, is my research just going to wither and die on the vine for the next 10 years? And so I used that as a spark for thinking about a research project on parents, on adults and youth sports. And for the next several years, I took field notes, and then a graduate student and I, Suzelle Posada-Diaz, did a whole bunch of interviews with women and men coaches, and the main question there was, how is it in this day and age, and this would be like 10 years ago now or more, how is it that you have a whole generation now of women who are young mothers who grew up with the benefits of Title IX, many of them played sports, many of them just know a ton about sports. How is it that you go out on the field and almost all of the coaches are men, and the women are very, very few women, a few more in soccer than in baseball and softball, but even there, the few women would be clustered at the very, very youngest ages. And, you know, I started sort of tracking them, and, you know, there would be at the age 5, 6, you know, entry level, there would be a small number of women coaches. Age 6, 7, smaller number, and then you get to 8, 9, and the women are pretty much gone. It's all men from there on, and coaches, and even mostly assistant coaches. And then the women were being team parents, or what they colloquially called team moms. So I was really interested in this sort of reproduction of what seemed to be a nuclear family, you know, a heterosexual nuclear family running these sports teams, you know, the father out in the field, the mother, the team mom, providing, you know, doing all of the organizing parties and giving snacks and organizing other parents to do things, and collecting money to buy something for the coach at the end of the season and that sort of thing. So that interested me a lot, and so I started observing what adults do and what happens in that very first meeting of the year when the coach gathers all the parents around and looks for volunteers for different things, and how does it happen that women end up being the team moms, and then in the interviews we probed that as well, and we looked at the ways in which the coaches look at treat the kids as well. But very early on in the study, my son made me promise that I wasn't researching the kids. And I said, okay, I'm really not. It's researching the adults here, and I'm not scrutinizing you and your friends. I guess the thing that hit me was the routine interactions between adults, and the way those interactions tended to reinforce and mirror the work and family lives of people. And this is a mostly professional class community that I was studying. The divisions of labor between women and men, once 2 kids arrive, 3 kids arrive in some cases, the ways in which highly educated women, many of them opted out of their careers, their highly paid husbands, going and working more hours to support the family, and then the woman becoming what we in my little town call the Uber moms, got their little minivans and driving kids around all the time. But taking all this tremendous knowledge and skill they had and bringing it into the schools and into community organizations, and then as team moms into organized sports. And so to give you one example of these sort of opening ceremonies, or not opening ceremonies, of these sort of team meetings that happened after the first game or first practice, I guess. One year, and this was typical, I learned in interviews as well. The coach, you know, who's a man and very experienced, he's been coaching for many years. He, at the end of practice, gathers all the parents around and says, we need a couple of assistant coaches, and he looks around and he looks just at the men, and he looks at one man who says, yeah, okay, I'll do it, and he looks at me, and I said, well, you know, okay, I'll do it, but I'd rather just be a scorekeeper because I take notes. You know? And so I became a scorekeeper for the team, and then he says, and we need a team mom. And he looks at the women, and I hear one of the women whisper to another woman say, I did this last year, and I'll be damned if I'm going to do it. Let one of the men do it, you know. And the other woman just says, yeah. But nothing happens, you know. Nobody volunteers. And then the next week, the coach announces that, you know, a woman has volunteered to be the team mom. So that sort of thing was quite common. And then, you know, I had one woman tell me in an interview that she volunteered to be an assistant coach, and she showed up for practice the first day, and she came right straight from work, and she was wearing a dress and heels. She said that maybe didn't help her case, but the coach reassigned her on the spot to be the team mom, and you know, I found it in observing her. One year, and because she was on, her son was on the same team as my son, that there was a certain amount of sort of resistance there in that. I mean, she accepted the position of team mom, but she actually put herself in a position of being a coach. And she showed up to all the practices. She would throw batting practice. She was actually a better batting practice pitcher than the coach was. He was also hitting the kids. But at the very end of the year, when we had our final little party, he marked her and thanked her as the team mom. And so I felt like there's these interactional processes. There's language that's very important, sort of gendered language that's being used. And then the third thing that I noticed was the gendering of space. And this is one of the things that was really great. You know, when you can use different research methods. In this case, I was using interviews and participant observation, because sometimes you don't notice something in the observation until it comes up in an interview, or vice versa. So you see something and then you start asking people about it in the interviews. And in this case, I started hearing people talking about, this is not so much the case in soccer, but in baseball and softball, the dugout as being this very gendered space, and the field being a gendered space. And so once I started kind of hearing stories about how parents, coaches, team moms talked about these spaces, I started just kind of watching it. And not just at my son's games, I'd go to girls' softball games and watch this. And I noticed that the managers, or the head coaches, I guess, you know, in baseball you call it a manager, very rarely would ever step into the dugout. They always just stayed out on the field around the third base coach box or the first base coach box, or just, and then moving about on the field, going out to the pitcher's mound. And the dugout was a place where the kids would be, and the team mom would come in and out of the dugout to make sure that kids who's about to bat had his helmet or her helmet, and if somebody got a little ouchy, you know, the mom would be the one to come in and check on their finger that they might have cut or something like that. And so I started to think about, you know, routine interactions, gendered language, gendered space, just as kind of the place where this was happening, but then also through the interviews connecting those kinds of interactions and that sort of production of gender in that space to what was happening in the rest of these folks' lives, and it tended to kind of mirror the things that were happening in the rest of their lives with work and